start all over.
Good morning.
All right, we'll stay near the mic. So just quick introduction for those that enter the room. Lee Coping, I'm with Science Logic. And what we're talking about today is really taking data to decisions and the role that AI can play in IT operations. So not here to talk about AI as it relates to determining threat vectors and battlefield targets and financials, myopically focused on AI relative to the mission of IT operations and mission readiness as it relates to IT. So kind of wanted to narrow that scope and the role that AI and AIOps play in that. So really, you got to start where the problems are, and that is no shortage of data out there. The problem is making the decisions based on that data and the impact that that has on humans. We're still, as an industry, as a technology space, entirely dependent on humans to interpret data, right? So this is an opportunity for AI, trying to understand the types of data, the variety, the velocity, and the volume of data is just too much for humans. So that's problem number one. That slows down response time. You know, these are all problems I'm sure you're familiar with. The next biggest one, which is sometimes less obvious, I see it more impactful in DoD in general than in other areas of sort of the global economy, as it were, but the skills lock, or really the being able to overcome the skill gap, right? We're over-reliant on senior level resources within IT operations, and that data, that knowledge has not been democratized down to lower level resources. It's more impactful in DoD, and I lived this for a period of time in my career, because you're rotating in and out. You really don't have the concept of tribal knowledge. Just at the moment you finally get it, you're off to the next duty station, right? So that always has an impact on readiness. And you come in as an L1, you don't really get the opportunity to meaningfully contribute until you've gained all this knowledge. So definite problem. And then reactive, right? As an IT operations person, you're always striving for this utopia of being proactive, and everything promises to be proactive. And there are shades of gray in being proactive. There's knowing it just in time, knowing it before it happens, maybe even fixing it before it happens. It's the rainbow we've all been chasing. AI brings a lot of these things closer to the reality. At the end of the day, the biggest, most captain obvious problem I think that could be solved is that democratization of decision making, because the data is presented in a very different, very native format, and that tribal knowledge is captured systematically and distributed in such a way. I think that's, bottom line up front. That's what AI can bring to to IT operations. This is the overlying elephant in the room. We just have too much data. I can remember a time where things weren't monitored. There were a lot of observability tools. Those that were, you had gaps in OT and IT and in security. Those days are over. We have plenty of tools. The tools are not the problem. The problem is the digital exhaust from those tools. There's just too much of it for a human to make sense of. How are we as an industry, and specifically as Science Logic, addressing that? Well, first of all, understanding some of the realities and the challenges that the budgets that are associated with mission readiness as it relates to IT operations, and the champions behind those, they've all moved, right? If they haven't moved around, they've moved off, they've moved up, they've moved, and monitoring the mission, although it has become more important, the champions behind that have moved so frequently and so often, and each person sort of brings in what they're comfortable with. That creates a lot of technical debt. So technical debt is a huge barrier to AI, or the success of AI, rather. The alerting tools are all commoditized. It doesn't matter anymore. At the end of the day, and being a manufacturer of one of those tools, it's hard to say, but it is commodity. We all get the same data. We all get the data the same ways. What you do with that data, how you extend that data, how you attach workflow, and how you automate that is a differentiation in tools. But there are so many of them out there. Most of the problem in the industry is trying to stitch all of that together and trying to make sense of it and trying to do integrations. And then ultimately, because technologies are changing and evolving, it's sometimes bringing more tools into there, which just compounds the problem. But a lot of those tools are cost prohibitive. There are a lot of expensive tools that are out there. And how do we solve this problem? It's largely through AI in general and ML, but also generative AI and agentic AI. So at the end of the day, it's all about driving context. If we can drive context to the data, present it in a way that is native to the consumer, which again, multiple consumers may have to consume this data multiple ways, but it all has to be the same data, factual, presented in a way that's understood to have the impact. So the vision of how this really should work is knowing when something fails at lightning strike, right, immediately, not going through 6 different red light, green light screens to try and figure out what's really going on. And when it's discovered, address it in plain language. You cannot go running down the hall saying router XYZ, has a BGP issue. That may be something that 1 or 2 people in the room jump in at because they're CCIEs, but the rest of the organization doesn't know what that means. What is the impact? If something's going to fail, I want to know it before it happens. And that's not just shades of gray, that's actually being truly predictive, and technology allows that today in a very systematic way. And you need the ability to ask and have answers available in a way that doesn't require having to get to those precious few L3 resources because they're off busy, usually fighting fires, right? So how do you democratize this data? How do you get the answers? How do you make those answers consistently? And then, and also, how do you introduce reasoning into this, right? That's usually always been the human in the loop role. I'm not to say that that goes away, but how do we drive that to a more consistent outcome with AI? So we see this as being built on strategic pillars. So first of all, you have to have that observability. You cannot have gaps in the data. You have to have data. Data has to be somewhat extensible on the ingest to normalize it. It needs to be service-centric. All too often, organizations, irregardless of the vertical, they're capturing data in a very siloed way, right? And it's not a big secret, but it's a lot of data. They don't really provide the service context. An individual piece of infrastructure that's providing a purpose is often providing multiple purposes. If it's an edge router, it affects lots of services. If it's an individual server running a particular web application, it may only impact one service. But if that server is also a print server because you're on a satellite site, now you've got 2 services. So understanding that service context is hugely valuable. That has to be baked into the data of observability. Then how do you apply AI to that? Well, natural language is a big piece of that, but it's also the contextual understanding. How do I understand the metadata? I can see the event, that's not the problem. What is that device attached to? What are the services relationships? Who's responsible for it? Providing all of that impact in a natural language engine is hugely important so that you can assess prioritization, right? There's always something that's going to happen. How do I prioritize that? If you're the technician on the front line, is it a finish my sandwich problem or I can't finish my sandwich problem? And knowing that, adjust all the priorities. And basically being able to curate that experience. That's probably the newest vertical in how do you achieve true AI operations. The rest of it's intelligent automation, which actually has been around for a while. Being able to have a cause and effect, a runbook action. When I see this or when the system sees this, initiate these actions. That is also part of the larger picture because that is the only way you'll get to proactive. If it can be solved, addressed, mitigated, or more importantly, triaged, do that at millisecond speed because a human will take a half an hour before they see it, before they get the commands, before they get the credentials to go run those, to triage those. These are all things that can be automated and be presented in that initial contextually relevant AI conversation. We also see this unique to the market. It has to be a hybrid platform. These are technologies and capabilities that can't just simply live in the cloud. It's unrealistic for the modern mission in DoD or DOW. Being able to, to bring this to the edge, to have isolated capabilities in an air-gapped environment, in environments that have only sporadic comms or limited comms where you have to be much more efficient. So all of these capabilities are wonderful, but if you can't get to them, you can't access them, and if you can't localize them, they're not a lot of use to the warfighter in the front lines. And we've introduced a lot of this. Again, didn't want to make this a commercial. I'll say it again at the end, but come down to booth 737, and we'll show some of these in action on a live system and explain, how it can be localized, how it can be air gapped, and things that are relevant to the audience. We've also introduced, as part of trying to, we provide technology to the market, and that's great. That's not all going to be consumed at the same pace in the same way across different organizations, right? That's perhaps the biggest problem. We all want the silver bullet. We all want to swipe a credit card, get a solution, and it works just like it does on our phone. Well, at enterprise scale, with the complexities of the environments that we support, that's unrealistic. So how do we represent this in a journey? Because it is a journey. Agentic AI is a means to an end. It's not the end. The end is really autonomic IT. And it's taking where most people are today, candidly, in that siloed or coordinated IT environment where you have data. That's not the issue. The problem is you have too much of it, and it's in too many different areas. You're still leveraging humans to draw insight. Maybe wholly, maybe partially, but humans are very much in the loop. Automation is lacked, largely because of technical debt, et cetera. But most people we see in the marketplace are somewhere between phase 1 and 2. So we've come up with a way to just sort of map this out so people understand where they start and where they're heading towards, and in a way that is consumable to say, you're not going to get there overnight. You're going to have to make cultural changes, organizational changes, technological changes. It's going to impact budget. It's going to impact everything, right? So how do you put that into a proper context? Getting to machine assisted, right? Crawl, walk, run, eat the elephant one bite at a time, all the different, things you can throw at that concept. But that's the idea of laying this out and not just providing a product, but saying, here's the reality, how you mature that product. And it's not bolt on a bunch of capabilities. It's not add more licenses, whatever. It's really just how do I consume what is there in a platform today? And no platform is the silver bullet, right? It's an ecosystem approach. We often are working hand in hand with things like ServiceNow, with things like Splunk, with things like a lot of niche security tools, right? You have to create that fabric in order to gain the full insight. And to put that into context relative to our world is being able to ingest all that data. We are largely approaching this from an infrastructure and application perspective to get that observability, something we've been doing for 2 decades, really good at it. That's what we've had to bring to market for many, many years in DoD and elsewhere, in a hybrid platform that can be truly air-gapped, isolated, still provide full functionality. But the capability that we had was always getting this data, regardless of whether it's mainframe data or running Kubernetes in a cloud environment. How can I ingest that in the same platform and create that stable data lake? So again, something we always had. We're now sharing that with a separate database because we understand the reality of agentic AI, deep analytical insights, tool chaining, and creating that ecosystem fabric puts a lot of demand on a single source of data. So how do I distribute that data so that I can hit it from different angles without degrading performance? So we've developed what we call Skylar AI to really offload that data, do lots of different things with it in a way that doesn't impact getting the data, visualizing the data, doing the core things that we've always done. And then whatever those insights are, provide them back to the core platform where most of the workflow usually is. And then we can start to layer on the tribal knowledge, all the SOPs, all the knowledge bases that have been created, all the old past tickets that somewhere in there had the golden nugget of how did I solve this problem when I saw it once before. No human's going to find that. Even the people that have been there 10 years will remember it, but it's still going to take them minutes, if not hours, to go dig that up where they saw it last. How can I leverage AI to really do that? How do I get new types of data that nobody ever conceived of ingesting? Streaming telemetry is just the first of that. There's 1,000 flavors of streaming telemetry within that bucket, but bringing that in to the data lake and also making this accessible not via APIs. We certainly have that. Every product has that. Those are fragile. They break at scale, and most people have experienced that if you're moving mass amounts of data back and forth to do different things with it. Going a little bit old school and creating an ODPC connection where you can consume that at wire speed because you're doing different things with the data than just accessing it. So we developed Skylar as this ability to sort of wrap all of our modern agentic AI, deep analytics, and insights into the same pool of data that we've always had. So you can draw inspiration from that with your other fabrics, or again, investigate us a little further to see how we're doing that in a single platform that's purpose-built and secure for the modern mission in the environments that we serve, DoD certified, FedRAMP for those that can consume it, et cetera. So In doing that, what we did first before we got to agentic AI, and I think lessons learned for anybody that's approaching how do I get to really AIOps, you got to have the normalized data, but how do you analyze that? We see that as really breaking down into having anomaly detection. Anomaly detection will drive an operator nuts. Anomalies are not bad things. They're just what they say they are. They're anomalies. So taking the approach of understanding anomalies when they happen, but being able to give fine-grained controls to operators to say these anomalies in these areas I want to know about. The others are great forensics detail should I ever need to know about it. So always on and collect it. But be very careful how you turn those into alerts, how you drive workflow, because there will be an infinite number of anomalies relative to events. So not just being able to capture them, but being able to fine tune those. And also introducing predictive alerting, not it went from minor to major because a threshold crossed and then another threshold crossed. That's old news. It's been there for a long time. And it's not that that's not still valuable, but how do I look at that trend and how do I provide enough insight, for example, a disk space issue, to give me 3 weeks notice, because I can't just go attach a volume. I may have to procure storage. I may have to move things around. I may have to go create storage where it's not, right? I need days, hours, weeks. I have a change control board I've got to go through. So how do we get to real predictive alerting? And we found ways to do that with a lot of different data types, and that continues to change every day. But that's a really big piece of how do I bring analytics into this whole AI conversation. How do I provide different visualizations? One of the things that we included within the platform was an alternative type of visualization, because we discovered a lot of the industry is using Microsoft PI, is using Tableau, is using Splunk, is using lots of different ways because they're great visualization tools. Maybe you have one, maybe you don't. Maybe you need something beyond what is in the core product of traditional IT operations dashboards. So being able to provide, in our case, it's Apache Superset, to be able to visualize data and combinations of data. And then we brought Advisor. This is the thing I really want, if you have the time, come down to booth 737 to see it. I can describe it, but this is changing the whole experience. I made the comment yesterday and somebody challenged me on it, but dashboards are dead in the observability space. Not dead yet, but dying. You need them to impress the management as they walk through the hallways and look through the glass knocks. Operators don't need those. Operators need a conversation that they can consume at the level they're at to tell them what happened, what it means, what to do about it, what's already been done, so they can make a final decision or put a human in the loop workflow, or resolve it all together, but tell them it was done and provide the audit trail. That is what agentic AI brings to the mission. It improves readiness in ways that were unfathomable even a year ago, to be brutally honest. This is what we call Skylar Advisor, and I would encourage folks to come down and see it in action and kind of interact with it. Ultimately, to bring that together, there's lots of different ways that happens, a lot of which, and I'll just point out on here, there's a lot of words, but being able to have a persona approach, not just I asked ChatGPT and it spit a bunch of stuff out. It's how does ChatGPT know that I'm a technician with 3 years experience that's only responsible for servers versus one that's got decades of experience that's an enterprise architect. Same data, how do I present that in a way that is actually consumable and understandable? Tailoring agentic AI to the consumer. That's often overlooked, but it is a huge piece of how that will adapt, change culture, improve efficiencies and operations, and sort of meet the users where they're at, rather than have them try and learn a whole new vocabulary. So I think that's a very important piece of it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the benefits are undeniably around efficiencies, better customer experience, right? Again, getting into that predictive, or at least being able to mitigate the risk, present the information, let the machines do the work, let the human interpret and make the decision still, or automate that decision where you see repetition and you're comfortable in doing that. AI has to earn trust, right? And so they're going back to that maturity chart. There's a way that you get there. And then ultimately making those strategic decisions of turning data into decisions. We have no shortage of data. We have a problem in making decisions because we don't know how to interpret the data necessarily as humans. That's where AI comes in. So again, booth 737, take a look at this, provide feedback, right? I love this space because it's ever evolving. What we were doing a year ago is not what we're doing yesterday, which is already different than what we've got planned for tomorrow, and that's all driven through deep dialogue with our customers, our partners, the consumers of this. It's an exciting world that we're shaping, but I wanted to give you a brief glimpse into it and be very myopically focused on that IT operations realm and how agentic AI, an approach to it, and what we're doing with it as a specific capability might be able to benefit you. Go ahead.
Thank you. What are some of your biggest challenges as you apply the platform from commercial to the federal government?
The good news is there's no difference in functionality. We grew up as a platform that addressed both markets. Our third customer 20 years ago was a very large White House. And so, adapting to the security protocols and things like that, the idea that we grew up on-prem and then became SaaS, there was a moment in time where there were a lot of differentiations in product features, even though it was the same product. Those gaps have been closed. So we're able to do things like FedRAMP, DoD certification, SOC 2 compliance, and make that the same code base regardless of how it's consumed or hosted. So we've been able to eliminate that, but that was largely, I don't want to say it was luck, but it was a Bob Ross happy accident that we started out here and we were able to adapt to SaaS without giving up that heritage because we always knew we were going to have to hang on to this. We have a tremendous number of customers in the purple and in the intel agencies and so forth that require this, and we're not going to give that market up.
How do you run into the roadblock, or how do you overcome the roadblock of biased language when it comes to, especially the federal government? I mean, the commercial side is, it's really not a big deal. You tag all, and anything's fair game. But when it comes to the government, things have to have proper words. So how do you?
Most of that's through training, but honestly, the training is the same. IT operations is still IT operations the world around. Electrons flow the same direction. Doesn't matter if you're commercial or DoD or others. We're all using the same technologies. The difference is, as you said, that language interpretation, and that really comes from what we're calling, and I hate the name, but it's a corpus that sits behind AI. You are feeding it your localized tribal knowledge in the form of knowledge bases, in the form of SOPs, any documents that you have. As you feed that, it self-learns and it spits back out, again, in multiple consumable ways based on the persona, the same language. It knows the alphabet soup that is, the military or the intel agencies or even civilian agencies because you're feeding that. But you're not having to train the model. You don't need data scientists. You need to have those documents and simply upload them, and AI will learn those terms and present it in a more consumable way. Good question, though, because it is unique. The technology is not. The consumption of information is very different.